Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The ancient pain of rejection. Rejection is one of the most universal experiences known to the human heart. Every person, at some point in life, has felt the sharp sting of being ignored, excluded, or left behind. It may come through a friend's silence, a lover's indifference, a family's coldness, or society's quiet dismissal. Yet no matter how subtle the act, it strikes something primal within us. An unanswered text can ache like betrayal. A declined invitation can feel like abandonment. It seems irrational that something so small could wound so deeply. But as Carl Jung observed, the pain of rejection is not just emotional, it is archetypal. It reaches into the oldest parts of our psyche, stirring fears that are far older than reason itself. Most people explain rejection as a blow to self-esteem, a bruise on the ego. But Jung went deeper. He believed rejection reawakens what he called the abandonment complex, a constellation of memories, emotions, and reactions formed in childhood, hidden deep in the unconscious. When we are rejected, we are not only reacting to the person or moment before us, we are reliving every time in our lives when being excluded meant danger, loneliness, or loss of love. In ancient times, to be cast out from the tribe meant death. Our nervous system, unchanged by modern comforts, still interprets social exclusion as a threat to survival. That is why rejection feels catastrophic. It is the echo of an ancient alarm sounding through our modern hearts. The child inside us remembers what the adult forgets. In our earliest years, love and acceptance from caregivers were not luxuries, they were lifelines. A baby who is ignored cannot survive. So, from our very first breath, the human psyche learns that acceptance equals safety, and rejection equals annihilation. This pattern becomes the foundation upon which our later emotions are built. Every ignored call, every cold glance, touches that original terror of being unseen. Jung described this as a wound of existence. A pain not only of being refused, but of feeling erased, as if one's very being no longer matters. When the abandonment complex awakens, something powerful happens beneath awareness. Rational thought disappears. A person might say, "It's fine, I don't care," but the body tells another story. The heartbeat quickens, the stomach tightens, the chest feels hollow. This is not weakness, it is memory. The psyche, like an old instrument, vibrates with the music of its earliest experiences. Even if the adult mind knows the situation is temporary, the child within panics, believing survival itself is at stake. What makes this phenomenon more complex is how invisibly it operates. Jung compared the complex to an independent personality within the psyche, a cluster of emotions, memories, and impulses that can seize control without consent. When rejection triggers it, we might act in ways we cannot explain. Some become desperate for reconciliation, flooding the other person with apologies or pleas. Others shut down completely, building walls of coldness to protect against further harm. Some turn anger inward, blaming themselves for being too much or not enough. The reactions vary, but all share a single origin, the unconscious fear of being left alone in a world that once equated solitude with death. And yet, Jung insisted that within this suffering lies profound wisdom. The pain of rejection is not meaningless, it is a signal pointing toward what still seeks healing. When we feel rejected, we are being asked to face the very parts of ourselves that were abandoned long ago. Beneath the sting of rejection hides a cry from the forgotten child within, pleading to be seen, accepted, and loved, not by others, but by the self. This is why the pain feels so consuming, because it is not only about the other person. It is about the self we have yet to reclaim. The moment of rejection dismantles the illusion of control and exposes the fragile foundation upon which we have built our worth. We suddenly realize that much of our identity, our charm, our compliance, our need to be liked, was constructed to ensure acceptance. When that acceptance is withdrawn, the structure collapses, revealing how dependent we have become on external validation. Jung saw this as a turning point in the evolution of consciousness. To feel rejected is to stand at a psychological crossroads. One can either spiral into self-pity and resentment, or one can choose to look inward and ask, what part of me have I abandoned in my search for love? This question, though painful, begins the process of healing. Because rejection, at its deepest level, is not the loss of another, it is the invitation to rediscover oneself. The first step toward freedom, Jung believed, is understanding that rejection is not a verdict on your worth. It is a mirror reflecting the places where you have mistaken others for your own source of value. The wound hurts because it reveals truth. And within that truth lies the seed of transformation. The human heart may always ache from rejection, but once you learn to see its deeper message, that ache becomes sacred. It is the call to turn inward, to embrace the abandoned self, and to begin the journey from dependence to wholeness. The mask that longs to be loved. When the sting of rejection becomes unbearable, the human psyche does something remarkable: it adapts. It learns to hide. From a young age, we begin crafting a version of ourselves that seems easier to love, one that smiles when it wants to cry, agrees when it wants to protest, and stays silent when it aches to speak. Jung called this adaptive facade the persona, our social mask, the image we present to the world. It allows us to function, to belong, to play our part in society. But when this mask is worn for too long, when it fuses with our identity, it no longer protects us, it imprisons us. Among all the forms of the persona, Jung identified a particularly fragile and deceptive one, the dependent persona. This is the mask built not out of confidence or purpose, but out of fear, the fear of being unloved, unnoticed, or abandoned. Behind it lies the belief that we are only worthy if we please others. The dependent persona becomes a shapeshifter, constantly scanning for what others expect and adjusting accordingly. It knows how to charm, how to soothe, how to adapt. But beneath its polished surface lives exhaustion, a soul that has forgotten its own contours. The tragedy of this mask begins in childhood. A child quickly learns that love often comes with conditions. When they are quiet, obedient, and agreeable, they receive warmth and attention. When they express anger, sadness, or independence, they are scolded, shamed, or ignored. The lesson sinks deep: to be loved, I must become what they want. And so begins a lifelong performance. As the years pass, this performance refines itself. The once vulnerable child becomes the overly accommodating friend, the perfectionist student, the partner who avoids conflict at any cost. Outwardly, such people seem gentle, helpful, even admirable. But inwardly, they live on the edge of collapse, terrified that a single misstep might cost them love. Their entire sense of worth depends on remaining desirable in others' eyes. Jung observed that the dependent persona is not inherently evil or manipulative, it is simply the psyche's attempt to survive in a world that once made acceptance a condition for safety. But survival built on constant adaptation comes at a devastating cost: authenticity. The more we perform to maintain love, the further we drift from our own truth. Over time, the dependent persona becomes our second skin. We forget that it is a mask at all. We start to believe that our people-pleasing, our perfectionism, our chronic politeness is who we are. Yet deep down, a quiet unease grows, a feeling of hollowness that no amount of approval can fill. Compliments feel fleeting, validation fades quickly. Every silence, every unread message, every delayed response threatens to expose the emptiness beneath. The person who lives through this mask becomes hypersensitive to rejection because their entire existence hinges upon being accepted. When rejection finally comes, and it always does, the result is catastrophic. It's not just the loss of another's affection, it feels like a collapse of identity itself. The persona, which was designed to keep pain away, shatters. And when it does, the person beneath realizes, often for the first time, that there is nothing substantial left to fall back on. The mask was never who they truly were. It was only a fragile shield held up against an old fear. Jung believed this collapse, though terrifying, is sacred. When the dependent persona crumbles, the psyche finally reveals what has been hidden all along, the shadow, the collection of feelings, desires, and instincts we buried in order to be accepted. These rejected aspects of ourselves do not disappear, they wait patiently in the depths of the unconscious, growing stronger the longer they are denied. And when rejection breaks the mask, the shadow rushes forward, demanding to be seen. This confrontation feels like chaos. The person who was once agreeable may now feel rage, resentment, or shame. They may act impulsively or retreat into despair. But Jung urged us to understand, this eruption is not destruction, it is awakening. The collapse of the persona marks the end of pretending and the beginning of truth. For perhaps the first time, we face the raw question, who am I when I am no longer performing? The answer does not come easily. It must be discovered in silence, in solitude, in the space left behind when approval no longer sustains us. Yet in that emptiness lies potential, the seed of authenticity. The dependent persona was created to win love from the outside world. But once it collapses, it gives us the rare chance to love ourselves from within. This is not the love of flattery or validation. It is the love of self-recognition, the quiet acceptance of one's full humanity, light and shadow alike. And so, paradoxically, rejection, the very thing we feared most, becomes the threshold of liberation. When the mask falls, we begin the real work of becoming whole. The shadow in the mirror. When the mask finally cracks and the dependent persona collapses, what emerges from beneath it is not peace, but chaos. It is here that we meet the part of ourselves we have spent a lifetime avoiding, the shadow. Carl Jung described the shadow as everything within us that we reject, repress, or deny, our anger, jealousy, ambition, desire, vulnerability, and even our unexpressed love. It is the dark mirror of the self, the place where everything we pretend not to be still lives and breathes. The shadow is not evil, it is human. Yet, because it threatens the image we try to uphold, we exile it into the unconscious. We tell ourselves we are kind, calm, selfless, but beneath those masks live the impulses we've buried in order to survive. When rejection rips away the persona, these exiled emotions come flooding back. That's why rejection can provoke such disproportionate feelings, sudden rage, despair, or shame. It's not just the pain of being unwanted, it's the reappearance of everything we've tried not to feel. The moment of rejection becomes a mirror. It shows us not only how others see us, but how we have refused to see ourselves. When someone turns away, we don't merely grieve their absence, we confront the unbearable thought that perhaps they saw something in us we feared was true. The mind begins whispering old refrains, I'm not enough. I'm too much. I'm unlovable. These words don't come from logic, they rise from the depths of the shadow. They are the echoes of forgotten pain, the voice of the inner child who once believed love had to be earned through perfection. Jung taught that what we suppress does not disappear, it waits. And the more we repress these emotions, the stronger they become. The shadow feeds on denial. Every time we say, "I'm fine," when we are breaking inside, the shadow thickens. Every time we swallow anger to stay likable, or hide ambition to avoid seeming arrogant, we make the shadow denser. Eventually, life must bring us face to face with what we've buried. Rejection is one of the most effective ways this confrontation begins. It is unsettling. When the shadow rises, we may feel flooded by emotions that frighten us. We may lash out, withdraw, or fall into despair. We may question everything about ourselves, our worth, our goodness, even our sanity. But Jung insisted that these reactions are not signs of failure, they are signs of awakening. The psyche is demanding integration. It is saying, you can no longer live divided against yourself. To integrate the shadow does not mean to act out our impulses or indulge every buried emotion. It means to face them consciously, to acknowledge that they exist, to understand where they come from, and to give them a voice. For example, anger, when owned and understood, transforms into assertiveness. Envy reveals hidden desires that long to be fulfilled. Shame exposes the parts of ourselves that are still waiting for compassion. The act of seeing the shadow with honesty and empathy begins to dissolve its destructive power. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That darkness is not external, it is within us. The more we face it, the less power it has to control us from behind the scenes. The shadow is not a monster to be slain but a neglected part of the soul asking to return home. Rejection, painful as it is, gives us the key to that locked room. When someone turns away, we are forced to turn inward. When love or approval disappears, we must confront what remains when everything external is gone. And there, in that raw silence, we find the shadow waiting, not to destroy us, but to free us. This journey is not easy. It feels like walking through fire, because we must touch every feeling we've tried to bury. But each step burns away illusion. Each confrontation reveals truth. The person who faces their shadow is no longer a prisoner of others' opinions. They no longer beg for validation, because they have seen the whole of who they are, and chosen to stay. Rejection, then, is not the end. It is initiation. It is the psyche's way of inviting us to reclaim what we abandoned in ourselves long ago. When we dare to look into the mirror of rejection and meet the shadow staring back, we are not collapsing, we are becoming real. The prison of approval and the path to freedom. From the moment we take our first steps in the world, we are trained to chase one thing, approval. As children, we learn that smiles, praise, and acceptance are rewards, while disapproval brings coldness, withdrawal, or punishment. It doesn't take long before love itself feels conditional. The child begins to think, if I behave the way they want, they'll keep me close. If I don't, they'll turn away. What begins as a survival instinct slowly evolves into a lifelong pattern, the relentless pursuit of validation. Carl Jung saw this phenomenon as one of the great psychological prisons of modern life. The ego, unsure of its own worth, seeks safety in others' eyes. We build our lives like actors on a stage, hoping applause will confirm that we exist. From the outside, it looks like ambition, kindness, or social grace, but beneath it is fear. We fear being unseen, unloved, unnecessary. Society reinforces this prison beautifully. We are praised for fitting in, rewarded for being agreeable, admired for being successful according to someone else's definition. The culture teaches us that belonging is everything, and so we trade authenticity for acceptance. We wear the dependent persona proudly, unaware that it is draining our soul. In Jung's words, we become statistical men, living as reflections of collective expectations rather than expressions of our unique nature. The problem with this dependence is that it never ends. External validation is a drug with an ever shorter high. 1,000 compliments can crumble under one criticism. One moment of exclusion can erase years of approval. Because when your sense of worth depends on others' opinions, you are forever vulnerable to their moods, their biases, their absence. You become what Jung called a hostage of the collective. This endless performance exhausts the soul. You start to sense it in small ways, pretending to agree when you don't, forcing a smile at the expense of your truth, saying yes when your heart whispers no. Each compromise chips away at the core of who you are. Soon you are living not as yourself but as a collage of other people's desires. The tragedy is that the more you strive to please, the less you are seen for who you truly are. You receive attention, but not recognition, affection, but not connection. And then comes the inevitable, rejection. No matter how perfectly you perform, someone will disapprove. Someone will walk away. When that happens, the entire illusion collapses. All the effort, the careful persona, the bending of your truth, it suddenly feels meaningless. You realize you were never truly loved, only the version of you that others could tolerate was. This revelation can feel like death. But Jung would say it is precisely here that rebirth begins. True freedom, he taught, begins with the development of internal authority, a foundation of worth that exists independently of others' approval. Internal authority is not arrogance or indifference. It is the quiet conviction that your value is intrinsic, that you are whole even when no one is clapping. It's the ability to look in the mirror and think, even if no one chooses me, I do not abandon myself. Building this inner authority is not easy. It requires breaking an addiction. You must detox from the approval of others the way one detoxes from a drug, through discomfort, craving, and withdrawal. You will disappoint people. You will lose false peace. You will feel alone. But what you gain is irreplaceable: authenticity, integrity, and an inner calm that no external praise can give or take away. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming a whole, self-directed individual rather than a fragment of the collective. It is not rebellion for its own sake. It is not selfishness. It is the courageous act of aligning your outer life with your inner truth. When you begin to live from this place, rejection loses its power. You no longer tremble at the thought of disapproval because you are no longer begging for permission to exist. Your worth stops fluctuating with the opinions of others. You stop apologizing for your boundaries, your emotions, your desires. You begin to act, not react. You speak, not perform. You live, not please. This transformation is the crossing from dependency to sovereignty. The cage door opens, but you must step through it willingly. The world outside may feel uncertain, but the air is clean, and the horizon wide. In this space of inner freedom, you are no longer a prisoner of the collective. You are an individual with a center so firm that rejection cannot shake it. Jung believed that only from this grounded place can we truly relate to others, because only those who no longer need approval can give genuine love. And so, the prison of approval, though built from fear, can become the doorway to liberation. To walk through it is to exchange the temporary comfort of being liked for the lasting peace of being real. Integration, becoming whole. When the masks fall away and the prison of approval finally cracks open, we find ourselves standing before the most formidable task of all, integration. Carl Jung called this the culmination of individuation, the moment when the conscious self and the unconscious finally meet, not as enemies but as partners. It is here that we begin to understand that wholeness is not achieved by being flawless, it is achieved by being complete. To integrate the self means to welcome home every part that we once rejected. The parts we called ugly, weak, selfish, or unworthy are not obstacles to enlightenment, they are the missing pieces of it. The shadow, long seen as a threat, becomes the final guardian of authenticity. Jung wrote that, the shadow is 90% pure gold, for within the darkness we avoid lies the power we've been seeking all along. But integration is not a gentle process. It demands honesty so fierce that it shatters illusions. You must confront the anger you pretended not to feel, the envy you disguised as indifference, the pain you masked as confidence. You must face the memories that shaped your fears and the desires that shaped your guilt. This confrontation can feel like a second rejection, except this time, it is you who must decide not to abandon yourself. The work begins in small acts of courage. It starts when you say, yes, that too is me. The jealousy, the pride, the grief, the longing, they all belong. When these parts are acknowledged, they lose their power to sabotage you from the shadows. Anger, when owned, becomes healthy assertiveness. Envy reveals ambition. Sadness deepens compassion. Even fear, when understood, transforms into wisdom. What was once poison becomes medicine. This is why Jung believed that no true healing occurs without descending into the depths of the self. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, he wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. The journey of integration is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming real. It is the act of standing in front of the mirror, no masks, no filters, and saying, I am all of this, and I am still worthy of love. When this acceptance takes root, something extraordinary happens. The external world loses its power to define you. Rejection no longer feels like death, because you no longer outsource your worth. You already know your flaws, and they no longer frighten you. You already know your darkness, and it no longer controls you. The opinions of others become reflections, not verdicts. Love becomes something to share, not something to chase. In this state, relationships transform. You no longer seek partners, friends, or communities to complete you, you approach them as a complete being. You stop begging to be seen because you have already seen yourself. You stop manipulating to be loved because you have already embraced your own unloved parts. This inner union radiates outward as peace, confidence, and quiet strength. Wholeness does not make you immune to pain. It simply gives pain a place to live without destroying you. You can feel sadness without collapsing into despair, anger without cruelty, rejection without self-erasure. Your emotions stop being threats and start becoming guides. Every feeling, no matter how dark, becomes a messenger carrying truth. And then, paradoxically, the world begins to shift. When you are no longer desperate for approval, you draw in relationships grounded in respect, not dependency. When you no longer fear rejection, others sense it and respond with authenticity. You emanate something rare, integrity. People feel it before they understand it. It's not perfection they see, it's peace. At the end of this long psychological pilgrimage, we understand what Jung meant when he said that individuation is both a psychological and a spiritual act. To integrate the shadow is to reconcile heaven and earth within yourself, to make peace between your light and your darkness, your persona and your soul. Rejection, in this light, was never the punishment it seemed to be. It was the invitation, the hand that pushed you inward when you refused to turn. Every painful goodbye, every silence, every cold shoulder was a teacher guiding you toward this final lesson: you were never unworthy, you were merely unfinished. To integrate is to finish the story. To look at every broken piece and realize that none of them were mistakes, they were mirrors, showing you the way home. When you embrace all that you are, the strong and the fragile, the brave and the afraid, you become unbreakable, not because you cannot fall, but because you can always return to yourself. That is the freedom Jung spoke of. That is what it means to become whole.